Some losses cut so deep, they change who you are. For Daniel Merrick, that loss came the night fire took everything he'd spent 5 years building. The 61-year-old widower had poured his savings and soul into restoring his family's old estate. Now, it was ash. When his 24-year-old daughter Claire came home for the first time in 3 years, they stood together in the ruins. While searching through what remained, they found a fireproof box hidden behind a burned wall. Inside were old sketches, letters, and records showing the house once sheltered families during the Great Depression. Daniel's great-grandfather had run it in secret. What else had been hidden all these years? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Merrick estate had stood on 40 acres of rolling Pennsylvania countryside for nearly a century before Daniel inherited it. When he'd first seen the place after his great-uncle's death, the house had been a skeleton of its former self, windows broken, roof sagging, walls stained with decades of neglect. Most people would have sold it for the land value alone. Daniel had seen something else entirely. That was 5 years ago, back when grief was still fresh and suffocating. His wife Catherine had been gone only 8 months when the estate became his. Their daughter Fiona had just turned 19, angry and adrift, blaming him for things he couldn't name and didn't understand. The house became his refuge, his project, his reason to wake up each morning. He'd spent the first 6 months just making it weatherproof, patching the roof, replacing rotted boards, sealing windows against the November wind. He worked alone mostly, learning as he went, watching YouTube videos on his phone while perched on ladders or kneeling on subflooring. The physical labor helped. When his hands were busy, his mind couldn't circle back to the hospital room, to Catherine's final breath, to the hollow space she'd left behind. By the 2nd year, the house started to reveal its character. Beneath layers of cheap paneling, he found original wainscoting, dark walnut that glowed when he stripped and refinished it. The staircase, hidden under carpet, turned out to be tiger oak with hand-carved spindles. Every discovery felt like a gift, like the house was rewarding his attention. Fiona visited exactly twice during those first 2 years. The conversations were stilted, careful, neither of them willing to speak about what had broken between them. She'd walk through rooms he'd restored, nod politely, and leave before dinner. He told himself she needed time. He told himself he was giving her space. The truth was simpler and harder. He didn't know how to reach her anymore, and the house was easier to fix than his daughter. The 3rd year brought the kitchen back to life. He salvaged the original soapstone sink, found period-appropriate fixtures at salvage yards, rebuilt the cabinets using wood reclaimed from a demolished barn 40 miles away. He installed modern appliances, but hid them behind custom panels. The room became a blend of 1,920 charm and contemporary function, exactly what he'd envisioned. By year 4, he was working on the 2nd floor. 6 bedrooms, each with its own character, each requiring different approaches. He spent 3 months on the master suite alone, the room where his great-grandparents had slept, where his grandmother had been born. He sanded floors by hand, restored the original light fixtures, even tracked down vintage wallpaper that matched the fragments he'd found behind the baseboards. Fiona stopped visiting entirely after that 2nd time. Phone calls became text messages became sporadic. She'd moved to Philadelphia, taken a job with a marketing firm, built a life that didn't include him. He told himself it was natural, that young people needed independence. But late at night, working alone in the silent house, he knew better. The 5th year brought the final touches. He refinished the front porch, replaced the slate roof, landscaped the grounds. The house looked like something from a magazine, a perfect restoration of Depression-era architecture. Neighbors started stopping by to admire it. The local historical society featured it in their newsletter. People told him he should be proud. He was proud. He was also lonely in a way that had nothing to do with being alone. The electrical fire started on a Tuesday night in February. Daniel had been reading in the study when he smelled smoke. By the time he found the source, faulty wiring in a wall he hadn't opened, hadn't known needed attention. Flames were climbing toward the second floor. He called 911, grabbed his laptop and photo albums, and got out. He stood in the snow-covered yard and watched 5 years disappear. The volunteer fire department did their best, but the house was old and dry and full of wood. By dawn, only the stone foundation and a few charred beams remained standing. The rest was ash and memory. The fire inspector came the next day, picked through the ruins, and delivered his verdict. Electrical fire, origin in the south wall of the dining room, no signs of foul play. The insurance adjuster came 2 days later, walked the perimeter, took photographs, and promised nothing. Daniel knew what that meant. Months of delays, disputes over coverage, settlements that wouldn't come close to what he'd invested. He rented a room in town, above a hardware store on Main Street. One room, a hot plate, a bathroom, down the hall. He'd spent nearly every penny on the restoration. His savings were gone. His retirement account depleted. The insurance payout, whenever it came, would barely cover the land value. He spent 3 days sitting in that room, staring at the wall, unable to summon the energy to do anything else. The house had been his purpose, his distraction, his way of not dealing with Catherine's death or Fiona's absence. Now it was gone, and he was 61 years old with nothing to show for 5 years of work except calloused hands and an aching back. On the 4th day, Fiona called. Not a text message, an actual phone call. Her voice sounded strange, careful, like she was testing ice before stepping onto it. "Dad, I heard about the fire. Mrs. Patterson from church told me. Why didn't you call?" He didn't have a good answer. The truth was, he hadn't thought she'd care. "I'm coming home," she said before he could respond. "I'm leaving in an hour. I'll be there by dinner." He wanted to tell her not to come, that there was nothing she could do, that he was fine. Instead, he said, "Okay." She arrived just after 6, driving a compact car he didn't recognize, wearing city clothes that looked wrong in their small town. She was thinner than he remembered, her dark hair longer, pulled back in a way that made her look older than 24. She hugged him in the parking lot, and for a moment she was 8 years old again, small enough to lift, simple enough to comfort. "Show me," she said. They drove to the estate in her car. The late February sun was setting, casting long shadows across the ruins. Yellow caution tape surrounded the property. The stone chimney stood like a monument among the wreckage. Everything else was destruction. Fiona walked slowly through what had been the front yard, her boots crunching on frozen ground. She didn't say anything for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick. "I'm sorry, Dad. I know how much this place meant to you." "It was just a house," he said, not believing it. "No, it wasn't." She turned to look at him. "It was your life. I know that. I'm sorry I wasn't here for it." They stood in the cold, the sky darkening above them, and something shifted. Not fixed. It would take more than one conversation to fix 3 years of silence. Shifted. An opening where there'd been a wall. "Can we look?" Fiona asked. "Is it safe enough to walk through?" The inspector said to stay out until they finish their investigation, but I don't think they're coming back. Daniel ducked under the caution tape. "Watch your step. The floors are gone in most places." They walked carefully, staying close to what remained of the walls. Daniel pointed out where rooms had been, what he'd accomplished in each space. Fiona listened, asked questions, seemed genuinely interested in a way she never had when the house was standing. In what had been the dining room, Fiona stopped. "Dad, look at this." Part of the south wall had collapsed, revealing the interior structure. Behind the charred exterior boards, there was a gap, a hollow space that shouldn't have been there, and in that space, barely visible in the fading light, was a metal box. Daniel's heart rate picked up. He pulled out his phone, turned on the flashlight, and aimed it at the wall. The box was about 2 feet long, a foot wide, made of some kind of reinforced steel. It looked old, weathered, but intact. "Is that what I think it is?" Fiona asked. "I don't know what it is. I never knew there was a hollow wall here. Can we get it out?" Daniel tested the burned boards. They crumbled under his touch, but the gap was accessible. He reached in carefully, gripped the box's handle, and pulled. It was heavy, but not impossibly so. He set it on the ground between them. The box was locked, but the fire had warped the metal enough that the latch was loose. Daniel worked it with his fingers until it gave way. The lid opened with a protest of old hinges. Inside were papers, lots of papers, remarkably well preserved. On top was a set of architectural drawings, the paper yellowed, but the ink still clear. Daniel unfolded them carefully. "These are the original plans," he said, studying the neat draftsmanship. "From 1932, looks like. But there are rooms here I never saw, spaces that weren't in any of the later drawings I worked from." Fiona leaned in, pointing to a notation. "What does that say? Private quarters? South wing? Was there a south wing?" "Not that I knew of. The house was always symmetrical, center hall, rooms on both sides." He traced the drawing with his finger. "But according to this, there was additional construction. Hidden rooms, maybe?" Beneath the architectural drawings were letters, dozens of them, bundled with string that had survived the decades. Daniel untied the first bundle carefully. The paper was fragile, the handwriting old-fashioned, slanted and formal. "Dear Mr. Merrick," he read aloud, "thank you for your correspondence regarding the Harrison family. We have made arrangements as discussed and will forward them on Tuesday next." He checked the date. "This is from 1933. Fiona was digging deeper into the box. She pulled out a leather-bound book, its cover cracked but intact. "Dad, this looks like a ledger." She opened it, carefully. The pages were filled with entries, each one dated, each one listing names, numbers, brief notes. Daniel moved closer, reading over her shoulder. "The 12th of October, 1931, Patterson family, 4 persons, arrived from Pittsburgh, stayed 6 days, moved on to Harrisburg." He flipped through more pages. "The 3rd of December, 1931, Morrison family, 6 persons, including infant, Chicago, stayed 2 weeks. What is this?" Fiona asked. Daniel kept reading, page after page of entries spanning years. Families from all over Ohio, New York, Illinois. Durations from a few days to several months. Brief notes about health, needs, destinations. "I think," he said slowly, "my great-grandfather was helping people. During the Depression, people who had nowhere else to go. He was giving them shelter." Fiona looked up at him, her eyes wide in the phone's light. "How many families?" Daniel flipped to the end of the ledger. The last entry was dated September 1938. He counted backward through the pages. Dozens, maybe 100 families, maybe more. They sat in the gathering darkness, surrounded by ruins, holding proof of a history neither of them had known existed. Daniel's great-grandfather, stern in the few photographs that survived, the man no one talked about much, had run some kind of refuge for desperate families. "Why didn't anyone tell us this?" Fiona asked. "I don't know. My father never mentioned it. Neither did my grandmother. Maybe they didn't know either." Daniel looked at the ledger in his hands, at the careful notations, the preserved records. Someone wanted this remembered. That's why it was hidden but protected. This box was meant to survive. Fiona stood up, her expression determined in a way that reminded him painfully of Catherine. "Then we need to figure out why. We need to know what he was doing and why no one talked about it." "Fiona, I don't even have a house. I'm living in a room above the hardware store. I don't have the resources to—" "I do," she interrupted. "I have time off saved. I have research skills. And Dad," she paused, her voice softening, "I need this. I need something to do with you that isn't about Mom, or about me leaving, or about everything we haven't said for 3 years. Can we just do this? Can we figure out what Great-Grandpa was doing?" Daniel looked at his daughter, really looked at her for the first time since she'd arrived. He saw Catherine in her face, saw determination and pain and hope all mixed together. He saw a chance he'd thought was gone. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, we can do that." They gathered up the box and its contents and carried them back to Fiona's car. As they drove away from the ruins, Daniel glanced in the side mirror at what remained of his 5-year project. The house was gone, but maybe, somehow, it had given him something better. Maybe it had given him back his daughter. The next morning, they spread everything from the fireproof box across the floor of Daniel's rented room. It wasn't much space, but it was enough. Fiona had brought coffee and pastries from the bakery downstairs, and they worked through breakfast, organizing documents by date and type. The architectural drawings revealed a house more complex than Daniel had ever realized. He'd worked from plans filed with the county in 1955, when his great-uncle had done renovations. Those plans showed a straightforward 2-story home with a basement. These original drawings from 1932 showed something different: additional rooms in the basement, a concealed stairway, spaces marked storage that seemed too large for their designated purpose. "He was hiding people," Fiona said, studying the basement layout. "These rooms were never meant to be seen by visitors. Look, there's no access from the main stairs. You'd have to know where the hidden entrance was." Daniel traced the lines with his finger. "I spent 2 months working on that basement. I thought I knew every inch of it. How did I miss this? Because you weren't looking for it, and because whoever closed it up did a good job." She pointed to a notation. "This says, sealed 1940. He covered it up after whatever he was doing ended." The letters provided more context. Most were brief, formal, discussing arrangements and transfers in careful language that never quite said what was actually happening. But patterns emerged. Organizations in other states, Chicago, Detroit, New York, sending word that families needed relocation assistance. Benedict responding with capacity updates, timing coordination, assurances of discretion. "It was organized," Daniel said, reading through a letter from a Pittsburgh pastor. This wasn't just him helping people he met. He was part of a network. Fiona had opened her laptop and was taking notes. What year did the Depression start? Stock market crashed in 29. Things got bad fast after that. And these entries start in 1931. She pulled up the ledger on her phone. She'd photographed every page. 2 years into the Depression, that's when people were most desperate. Daniel picked up another bundle of letters. These were different, personal, written in a woman's hand. The signature at the bottom made him pause. "Yours in service, Annalise." He looked at Fiona. "Do you recognize that name?" "No. Should I?" "I don't know. It feels familiar somehow." He read the letter aloud. "Dear Benedict, the family arrived safely and are settling in well. The children are resilient, though the mother still grieves for what they left behind. Your kindness provides more than shelter. It provides hope. We must continue this work, whatever the cost." "Benedict," Fiona said. "That was Great-Grandpa's first name." "Yeah, Benedict Merrick." Daniel flipped through more letters from Annalise. There were dozens, spanning from 1932 to 1938. Her tone grew more urgent as the years progressed. References to increased danger and those who oppose us, and discretion becoming vital. "Dad, I think this was more than depression relief." Fiona was reading something on her laptop. "I'm looking at historical timelines. 1933, that's when Hitler came to power in Germany. 1935, Nuremberg laws. 1938, Kristallnacht." Daniel felt something cold settle in his stomach. "You think he was helping Jewish families?" I think maybe he was helping all kinds of families, but especially ones fleeing persecution. Look at some of these names in the ledger. She read from her phone. Cohen, Goldstein, Levy, Rosenthal, Weiss. Daniel took the ledger and flipped through it with new eyes. She was right. Mixed in with Irish names and Italian names and Polish names were unmistakably Jewish surnames, and many of them were listed as coming from New York or Baltimore port cities where immigrants would have arrived. But this was before the war, he said, before most Americans knew what was happening. Some people knew. Some people were paying attention. Fiona found another letter. Listen to this. It's from 1937. The situation in Europe grows dire. Those with means can still escape, but many have nowhere to go. Our government turns them away. We must do what we can, when we can, for as long as we can. Dad, they were running an underground railroad for refugees. Daniel sat back against the wall, overwhelmed. His great-grandfather had always been a cipher in family law, a stern man, religious, principled, but distant. He died in 1962, when Daniel's father was still young. No one talked about him much. Daniel had assumed there wasn't much to tell. Why didn't anyone know about this? He asked. Why hide it? Maybe it wasn't safe to talk about. If he was helping people, the government wouldn't admit if there were people opposed to what he was doing. Fiona trailed off, then looked up sharply. Dad, what happened to Annalise? I don't know. I've never heard that name in family stories. Fiona was already typing, searching. Her face went still as she read something on the screen. Oh no. What? She turned the laptop toward him. It was a newspaper archive. A scan of a page from the Harrisburg Patriot News, dated October 1938. Local woman found dead, Daniel read. Annalise Keller, 32, of Chester County, was found deceased in Marsh Creek on Tuesday evening. Authorities believe Miss Keller, who had been visiting the area, lost her footing on the creek bank. Her death has been ruled accidental. Miss Keller was unmarried and had no immediate family. Services will be private. The article was small, tucked in a corner of the page. Easy to miss. Easy to forget. That's 3 days after her last letter to Benedict, Fiona said quietly, and less than a month after the final entry in his ledger. They looked at each other. The small room suddenly felt smaller, the winter light through the window colder. You don't think, Daniel started. I don't know what to think. But lost her footing? A 32-year-old woman who'd been coordinating a secret refugee network? Fiona's voice was tight. That's awfully convenient. Daniel picked up the ledger again, found the last entry. The 18th of September, 1938. Feldman family, 3 persons. New York. Arrangements uncertain. Proceed with caution. The handwriting was shakier than earlier entries, the note more terse. He stopped after she died, Daniel said. Whatever they were doing, it ended with her. Or he got scared. If she was killed, we don't know that. We don't know she wasn't. Fiona stood up, pacing the small room. Think about it. 1938. There were plenty of people in this country who didn't want Jewish refugees coming in. If Benedict and Annalise were helping people enter the country or helping them hide after they got here, someone might have wanted them stopped. Daniel felt the weight of the ledger in his hands, the careful records of families helped, lives saved, and below that, the question of what it had cost. We need to know more about her, he said. About what really happened. Agreed, but Dad. Fiona knelt beside him, her expression serious. If we start digging into this, we might find things we don't want to know. About great-grandpa, about the family, about what happened back then. He saved people, Daniel said. Whatever else happened, he saved people. That matters. It does, but the truth might complicate that story. Daniel looked at the documents surrounding them, at the evidence of his great-grandfather's secret life. 5 years he'd spent restoring Benedict's house, never knowing what it had truly been. A refuge, a safe house, a place where desperate people found shelter. The fire had taken the physical structure, but it had given him this, a glimpse of the man who'd built it, the purpose it had served. "I want to know," he said. "I need to know. For him, for the families he helped, and maybe for us. Something we can do together." Fiona smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her in years. "Then let's figure out who Annalise Keller was, and what really happened in October 1938. Chester County Historical Society occupied a converted Victorian mansion on the outskirts of town. Daniel and Fiona arrived just after it opened, the morning air still crisp with late winter cold. A hand-painted sign directed them to the research library on the second floor. The librarian at the desk was maybe 70, with silver hair pulled into a loose bun and reading glasses on a beaded chain. Her name tag read, "Constance." She looked up when they entered, her expression shifting from polite professional to genuinely interested when Fiona explained what they were looking for. "Annalise Keller," Constance repeated, something lighting in her eyes. "Now that's a name I haven't heard in years. My grandmother used to mention her." Daniel and Fiona exchanged glances. "Your grandmother knew her?" Daniel asked. "Knew of her anyway. They didn't run in the same circles. Grandmother was working class, and the Kellers were old money. But everyone knew about Annalise." Constance stood up, gesturing for them to follow her into the archive room. She was something of a scandal. The archive was lined with filing cabinets and shelves of boxes, all meticulously labeled. Constance pulled out a step stool and retrieved a box marked Keller Family 1880 to 1950. Annalise was the only child of wealthy parents, very wealthy steel money originally. Then, investments. She was educated at Bryn Mawr, which was progressive for the time. She was expected to make a good marriage, settle down, maybe do some charity work. Constance set the box on a research table. She did not cooperate with those expectations. Inside the box were newspaper clippings, photographs, society page announcements. Fiona started photographing everything with her phone, while Daniel read through the materials. A photograph from 1930 showed Annalise at 19, posed in a formal portrait. She had the same direct gaze from the photo Daniel had found, but here she looked younger, less certain. The caption identified her as debutante of the season. She was engaged, Constance said, finding a clipping from 1931, to a wealthy man. The wedding was planned for June of that year, but in May she broke the engagement. No explanation given publicly, but there were rumors. What kind of rumors? Fiona asked. That she'd developed sympathies considered inappropriate for someone of her station. That she'd been attending meetings, associating with labor organizers. That she'd become, as my grandmother put it, too concerned with other people's troubles. Constance smiled slightly. Grandmother said it like it was a character flaw. Daniel found another clipping, this one from 1932. It was brief, just a few lines noting that Annalise Keller had taken up residence in a modest cottage and was pursuing philanthropic interests independently. She was cut off, he said, understanding. Or cut herself off. Bit of both, probably. Her parents died in 1934 influenza, and she inherited everything. But by then, she'd already established herself outside their social sphere. Constance pulled out a ledger book. This is our record of charitable organizations from that era. Look here, 1933. Annalise Keller founded something called the Relocation Assistance Fund. Fiona leaned in to read. What did it do? I'm not entirely sure. The records are sparse, and it only operated for about 5 years. But it seems to have helped families who needed to move quickly and quietly. Refugees, Daniel said. Constance met his eyes. That would be my guess, yes. Though they wouldn't have used that word. Like Annalise, Fiona said. Like Annalise. Constance pulled out one more item, a photograph of a group at what looked like a meeting. She pointed to a woman in the second row. That's her, 1936, at a conference in Philadelphia for refugee aid organizations. In the photo, Annalise stood among serious-looking people, older than her. She fit right in. What happened to her? Daniel asked. The newspaper said she drowned. Constance's expression shifted, became more guarded. That's what they said. But you don't believe it. I don't know what I believe. I know my grandmother didn't believe it. She said the Kellers had made enemies, that there were people in the county who didn't approve of what Annalise was doing, and that when she died, those people seemed awfully quick to declare it an accident and move on. Who were they? Fiona asked. The enemies? I don't have proof of anything. Just stories passed down, the kind of thing people whispered about but never said outright. Constance looked between them. Why are you asking about Annalise? Daniel pulled out the photograph from the fireproof box, the one of Benedict and Annalise with the families. That's my great-grandfather, Benedict Merrick. We found documents showing he was working with Annalise, helping families during the Depression. We're trying to understand what they were doing and what happened to end it. Constance studied the photograph for a long moment. When she looked up, her eyes were bright. Then you need to be careful. Careful of what? Of asking the wrong questions to the wrong people. Chester County is a small place with long memories. Some families still have influence, still have reasons to prefer certain stories stay buried. She handed the photograph back. But if you're determined to dig, I can point you in a direction. She went to another filing cabinet and pulled out a folder. These are records from the coroner's inquest into Annalise's death. Brief, perfunctory, no real investigation. But there's a witness statement here from someone who saw her the day she died. A groundskeeper at the Keller estate. His name was Perry Sutherland. Is he still alive? Daniel asked. No, he died in the 70s. But his son still lives in the area. Runs a landscaping business. If his father told him anything about that day, he might be willing to share it. Fiona was already typing the name into her phone. I found him. Sutherland Landscaping. That's about 20 minutes from here, Constance said. She wrote down the address on a slip of paper. Tell him I sent you. They thanked her and gathered their materials. As they were leaving, Constance called after them. One more thing. Annalise's former fiancé, his family is still prominent here. His grandson sits on several boards, including the historical societies. If your research touches on anything that might reflect poorly on that family. She didn't finish the sentence. We'll be careful, Daniel promised. They found Sutherland Landscaping in an industrial park. The office was a small building attached to a warehouse. A man in his 60s stood in the parking lot, talking to a crew. When Daniel and Fiona approached, he excused himself and came to meet them. Mr. Sutherland, my name is Daniel Merrick, and this is my daughter Fiona. Constance from the Historical Society suggested we talk to you about your father, and about something that happened in 1938. His expression became curious. About what? About Annalise Keller. Sutherland studied them for a moment, then nodded toward the office. Come inside. The office was functional desk, filing cabinets, a coffee maker. Sutherland poured 3 cups and sat down behind the desk. My father didn't talk much about his time working for the Kellers, he said. But when he did, there was always this weight to it, like he was carrying something heavy. What did he tell you? Daniel asked. That he liked Miss Annalise. That she was kind to the staff, treated them like people, that she was doing important work. Sutherland sipped his coffee, and that her death wasn't what they said it was. What did he think happened? Fiona asked, leaning forward. He never said directly. But he told me once, when I was grown, that Miss Annalise had been threatened, that there were men who came to the estate, men who didn't like what she was doing, and that the day she died, she'd told him she was meeting someone she didn't trust but had to see. Did he say who? No. But he said she was nervous, more nervous than he'd ever seen her. She gave him something that day, an envelope, and told him if anything happened to her, he should hold on to it. Keep it safe. Daniel's pulse quickened. Did he keep it safe? He did, and before he died, he gave it to me, made me promise to keep it, said maybe someday someone would come asking the right questions. Sutherland stood up and went to a filing cabinet. From the bottom drawer, he pulled out an old manila envelope, yellowed with age. I think maybe you're those someones. He handed the envelope to Daniel. It was sealed, the glue dried and cracked, written on the front in faded ink, for the truth, when it can be told. Daniel looked at Fiona. She nodded. He opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single letter, written in Annalise's handwriting. The date was October 1938, the week she died. Daniel read it aloud, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. To whoever finds this, if you're reading it, then I am likely dead, and the truth has been kept hidden too long. For 6 years, I have worked with Daniel Merrick and others to help families escape persecution. We have sheltered them, fed them, helped them find safety when their government would not. This work has made enemies. Chief among them is a man named Jacob Brenner, who owns mills throughout the county and whose sympathies lie with those who believe America should close its doors to the desperate. Brenner has threatened me repeatedly. He has told me that if I do not cease my activities, there will be consequences. I have refused. Tomorrow, I meet with him one final time. I do not trust him. I do not believe I will change his mind. But I must try. If I do not return from this meeting, know that whatever they say about my death, it was not an accident. Jacob Brenner cannot abide resistance, and I will not stop resisting. Annalise Keller. The office was silent. Outside, the landscaping crew laughed about something, their voices distant and ordinary. Inside, 3 people sat with evidence of murder that had been called an accident for 87 years. Jacob Brenner, Fiona said finally. Do you know that name? Sutherland's face was grim. Everyone in Chester County knows that name. The Brenners are one of the founding families. Jacob's great-grandson runs the family foundation now. They're still here, Daniel said. Still prominent. Very prominent. The Brenner name is on buildings, scholarships, hospital wings. Sutherland looked at the letter in Daniel's hands. That letter is the first hard evidence I've ever seen that Jacob Brenner was anything other than the philanthropist history remembers. Fiona was already researching on her phone. Jacob Brenner died in 1952, owned multiple manufacturing businesses, major donor to the America First Committee. That was the isolationist group before World War II. The one with Nazi sympathizers. So he had ideological reasons to oppose refugee aid, Daniel said. And economic ones, Sutherland added. If you were helping people relocate, find better opportunities, you were threatening his business model. Daniel looked at the letter again, at Annalise's determined handwriting. She'd known the risks. She'd gone anyway. And she'd died for it. We need to tell this story, he said. People should know what she did, what my great-grandfather did, and what Jacob Brenner did, Fiona added. Sutherland's expression was troubled. You understand what you're taking on? The Brenner family won't want this coming out. They've built their reputation on Jacob's supposed generosity. Evidence that he was a murderer. We have the truth, Daniel said. Sometimes that's not enough. But Daniel was thinking about the fireproof box, about his great-grandfather carefully preserving records, hiding them where they might survive. Benedict had wanted the story told. He'd just been too afraid to tell it himself. Daniel wasn't afraid, not anymore. We'll be careful, he said. But we're doing this, Sutherland nodded slowly. Then you should keep that letter, and you should know my father said there were others involved, other families, other people who helped. If you're going to tell the story, tell all of it. They left with the letter and a sense of purpose. In the car, Fiona turned to her father. This is going to get complicated. I know. The Brenners will try to stop us. Probably. We might not win. Daniel looked at his daughter and saw. a determination that reminded him of Catherine. Then we'd better be smart about it. They drove back, planning their approach. Fiona suggested documenting everything before going public, building an archive that couldn't be suppressed. Daniel wanted to find more witnesses, more families who'd been helped. Together, they outlined a strategy. For the first time in years, Daniel felt like they were truly partners. Not father and child, but allies in something that mattered. Back in Daniel's room, they laid out everything they'd gathered. Fiona created a digital archive, photographing each document from multiple angles, uploading them to secure cloud storage. If anyone tries to take the originals, she explained, we'll still have copies. Daniel watched her work with pride and sadness. She'd learned to be this careful after Catherine died. When grief had made him withdraw into the house restoration, Fiona had withdrawn into control. He understood now that the restoration had been his way of not dealing with loss. He wondered what had been hers. "Did you eat?" he asked. It was past 7. They walked to the Chinese restaurant 2 blocks away, ate in comfortable silence, and walked back. The night was cold and clear, stars visible in a way they never were in Philadelphia. "I miss this," Fiona said quietly. "Small town, quiet. You could have visited." "I know." She didn't elaborate, and Daniel didn't push. Back in the room, Fiona returned to her laptop while Daniel examined the photograph more closely. The families gathered around Benedict and Annalise. He counted 23 people. Some looked German, others Polish. One family appeared Italian. The children ranged from infants to teenagers. On impulse, he photographed it and texted it to his cousin Lawrence in Oregon, who was the family genealogist. Asterisk. Found this in the ruins. Do you know anything about what great-grandpa Benedict was doing in the 1930 seconds? Asterisk. The response came back surprisingly quickly. Asterisk. Where did you get that? Dad always said those photos were destroyed. Asterisk. Daniel stared at his phone. Asterisk. What photos? You knew about this? Asterisk. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, asterisk. Call me. Asterisk. Daniel stepped into the hallway and dialed. Lawrence picked up on the first ring. Your dad told me the fire destroyed everything, Lawrence said without preamble. That's what he told everyone after Benedict died, that all the records were gone. What records? Daniel asked. Of the refuge work. Benedict ran that house as a safe station for people fleeing persecution. During the Depression, after, even during the early war years. My dad, your Uncle Frank, he knew about it. He was just a kid, but he remembered people coming and going, remembered his father telling him never to speak of it. Why not? Lawrence was quiet for a moment. Because someone died. A woman named Annalise Keller. She was Benedict's partner in the work, maybe more than a partner. But after she died, Benedict shut the whole operation down, sealed up the rooms, burned a lot of records, told everyone in the family to forget it had ever happened. He didn't burn everything, Daniel said. There was a fireproof box hidden in the walls. We found it after the fire. What was in it? Letters, ledgers, and a letter from Annalise saying she thought she'd be killed by a man named Jacob Brenner. The silence on the other end was profound. Finally, Lawrence spoke, his voice strained. You need to be careful, Daniel. The Brenners are still powerful. If you start making accusations, I'm not making accusations. I'm stating facts, she wrote the letter. She died. Those are facts. Facts that people with money and lawyers can bury. Look what happened to your house, everything Benedict built. Gone. Maybe that's a sign you should let this stay buried too. Daniel felt anger flare. My house burning down wasn't a sign. It was faulty wiring. Was it? Have you gotten the full fire inspector's report? Not yet. The insurance company is still processing. He stopped. What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just saying that small towns have long memories and old families protect themselves. If the Brenners think you're going to damage their reputation, they have ways of making problems disappear. You think they burned my house? I think coincidences are rare. You inherit Benedict's house, spend 5 years restoring it, and right as you're finishing, it burns down? That's a lot of coincidence. Daniel's mind was racing. The fire inspector had seemed thorough, professional. But what if— "I have to go," he said. He went back into the room. Fiona looked up from her laptop. What happened? He told her everything: Lawrence's call, the family history, the suggestion that the fire might not have been accidental. Fiona's expression grew more serious with each detail. "Dad, if they would burn your house—" "We don't know they did anything. Lawrence was just speculating, based on family knowledge we didn't have until tonight." She pulled up a new browser window. "We need to get that fire inspector's report. The full one, not just the summary." They worked until past midnight. Fiona set up spreadsheets tracking families from the ledger, noting locations, dates, any details that might help identify descendants. Daniel drafted a careful introduction, explaining their project, emphasizing historical preservation rather than criminal investigation. By the time they stopped, Fiona had identified 12 families with common enough surnames that genealogy databases showed potential matches. She drafted messages to send through various ancestry websites, asking if anyone had family stories about staying at an estate in Pennsylvania during the 1,930 seconds. "It's a long shot," she admitted. "Most of these people would be in their 90s. We're more likely to reach grandchildren. That's okay. Sometimes stories get better with retelling." The next morning, Fiona arrived with coffee and the fire inspector's full report, obtained through a request to the insurance company. They spread it across the small table and read through it together. Most of the report was technical descriptions of burn patterns, electrical system failures, accelerant testing results. But near the end, Daniel found something that made him pause. "Secondary ignition point," he read aloud. "In addition to the primary electrical fire in the south wall, evidence suggests a secondary ignition in the basement area. Cause undetermined. Given the extent of damage, further investigation not warranted." Fiona looked at him. "2 different fires. That's what it sounds like. Dad, that's not an accident. That's arson." Daniel read the section again. The inspector had noted it but dismissed it as not requiring follow-up. Why? Because the primary cause was clearly electrical, or because someone had encouraged him not to look too closely? "We need to talk to the fire inspector," Fiona said. The fire inspector's name was Gerald Whitmore. He agreed to meet them at a coffee shop near the fire station. He was younger than Daniel expected, maybe 40, with the careful demeanor of someone who'd learned to measure his words. "I remember your property," he said after they'd gotten coffee. "Significant loss. I'm sorry." "Thank you," Daniel said. "We had some questions about the report, specifically about the secondary ignition point you mentioned." Whitmore's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "What about it? You said the cause was undetermined. What does that mean exactly?" "It means I couldn't establish a clear origin for that particular fire. The basement was extensively damaged. Could have been electrical, could have been stored materials, could have been a dozen things. But it was separate from the main fire," Fiona said. "Started independently." "Appeared to." "Yes, but in a fire that intense, with that much structural collapse, it's difficult to establish precise timelines." "Or someone set it deliberately," Daniel said. Whitmore set down his coffee cup carefully. "Is there a reason you'd think that?" Daniel and Fiona exchanged glances. They'd agreed not to mention the Brenners directly. "Not yet. We've learned some things about the house's history," Daniel said. "About activities that took place there in the 1,930 seconds. Activities that certain people might have wanted forgotten. Mr. Merrick, if you're suggesting arson, that's a serious accusation. Do you have evidence?" "Do you?" Fiona asked. "Evidence it wasn't arson?" Whitmore was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was lower. Off the record, and I mean completely off the record, there were some anomalies I didn't include in the final report. What kind of anomalies? The burn pattern in the basement was consistent with an accelerant, not conclusive, but suggestive, and the timing bothered me. The electrical fire would have taken time to spread, but the basement fire seemed to have started almost simultaneously. Why didn't you investigate further? Daniel asked. I recommended it. My supervisor decided it wasn't necessary. Who is your supervisor? Daniel asked. Chief Harding. He's been with the department 30 years. Fiona was already searching on her phone. Her face went still. Chief Ronald Harding, board member of the Brenner Family Foundation. The silence at their table felt heavy. Whitmore didn't look surprised. You knew, Daniel said. I knew there were connections. I didn't know what they meant. Whitmore glanced around the coffee shop, making sure no one was close enough to overhear. Look, I can't prove anything, but I can tell you that when I raised concerns about the secondary fire, Chief Harding shut down the conversation very quickly. Said we had limited resources and needed to focus on clear-cut cases. Can you reopen the investigation? Fiona asked. Not without new evidence or a formal complaint. And even then, with the chief's involvement. He trailed off. I'm sorry. I wish I could do more. After Whitmore left, Daniel and Fiona sat processing what they'd learned. They burned your house, Fiona said quietly. The Brenners, or someone working for them. They knew what was hidden there. But how? No one knew about the fireproof box. I didn't even know. Maybe they didn't know specifically. Maybe they just knew Benedict had used the house for the refuge network, and they couldn't risk what might be preserved there. They returned to Daniel's room to check Fiona's outreach efforts. She'd received 3 responses to her genealogy inquiries overnight. 2 were dead ends. The 3rd was different. Asterisk. My grandmother stayed at a house in Pennsylvania when she was 7 years old. She never forgot it. She said the man who ran it saved her family's life. His name was Benedict Asterisk. The message was from a woman named Judith Rosenberg, living in Maryland. She'd included her phone number. Fiona called immediately, putting it on speaker. An older woman answered, her voice warm but cautious. Miss Rosenberg, my name is Fiona Merrick. I sent you a message about your grandmother. Yes, I got it. You said you were researching the Merrick estate? That's right. Benedict Merrick was my great-great-grandfather. We recently found records showing he helped families during the Depression. Your grandmother's name, Sophie Feldman, is in his ledger. There was a sharp intake of breath. How do you know that name? Grandma Sophie died 15 years ago. It's in the records. September 1938. She came from New York with her parents and her brother Samuel. Oh my God, Judith said softly. She told me stories, but I never knew the exact details. She said a man named Benedict took them in when they had nowhere else to go, that he kept them safe. Safe from what? Daniel asked. Who's that? This is Daniel Merrick, Benedict's great-grandson. Please, anything you can tell us would help. Judith was quiet for a moment. Grandma Sophie came from Berlin originally. Her family got out in 1937, but barely. They made it to New York, but they had no money, no connections. Her father couldn't find work. No one would hire Jews, even in New York. They were living in a single room, desperate. How did they find Benedict? Fiona asked. Through a network. Grandma said there were people helping families like theirs, moving them to safer places. Someone in New York contacted someone in Pennsylvania, and they ended up at Mr. Merrick's house. How long did they stay? 3 months, long enough for her father to find work in Harrisburg. Grandma said Mr. Merrick taught her English, that there was a woman there who helped her mother learn to cook. She said they were the kindest people she'd ever met. Daniel's throat was tight. The woman, do you remember her name? Grandma called her Miss Annalise. She said Miss Annalise had beautiful dark hair and sad eyes, that she sang songs in different languages to comfort the children. Fiona and Daniel looked at each other. "Miss Rosenberg," Fiona said carefully, "would you be willing to talk about this publicly? To help us document what Benedict and Annalise did?" "Why? What's this really about?" Daniel decided on honesty. "We think Annalise Keller was murdered because of the refuge work. We think powerful people covered it up. We want to tell the real story, what they accomplished, why it mattered, what it cost." Judith was quiet for so long that Fiona thought she'd hung up. Finally, Grandma Sophie used to say she owed her life to those people, that if it weren't for them, she would have died, if not from hunger, then from the camps. She got out just in time. Most of her cousins who stayed in Germany didn't survive. "Then help us honor them," Daniel said. "Help us make sure people remember." "Yes," Judith said. "Yes, I'll help. What do you need?" They spent an hour on the phone with her, recording the conversation with her permission, getting details about Sophie's stay, about Benedict's kindness, about the other families who were there at the same time. Judith promised to send photographs. Sophie had kept a few from that period, including one of her standing in front of the house. When they hung up, Fiona was smiling. "That's one. We need more." They worked through the afternoon, cross-referencing names from the ledger with genealogy databases, reaching out through multiple platforms. By evening, they had 3 more responses, all promising. Each contact led to more information, more connections. The network Benedict and Annalise had been part of was larger than Daniel had imagined. "This is bigger than we thought," Fiona said, updating her spreadsheet. "This wasn't just depression relief. This was an organized resistance movement." Daniel was examining something else. Judith had sent a photograph of Sophie Feldman at age 7, standing with her family in front of the house. Behind them, just visible on the porch, were Benedict and Annalise. But there was someone else in the photo, a man standing to the side, not quite part of the family group, but clearly present. His face was partially turned away, but something about his posture suggested authority. Daniel zoomed in on the image. The man wore expensive clothes, had a watch chain visible. He was holding something, papers or documents. "Fiona, look at this." She came to peer at his phone. "Who's that?" "I don't know, but he was at the house in 1938. Fiona took the phone and zoomed in further, then suddenly went very still. "Dad, look at the car behind him." Daniel looked. Parked on the edge of the frame was a black sedan. On the door was a partial emblem. Fiona was already enhancing the image. The emblem became clearer, a stylized B, surrounded by flourishes. "Brenner Mills," she said. "That's the Brenner Mills Company logo." They stared at the photograph. Jacob Brenner had been at Benedict's house. He'd been present while refugees were being sheltered there. "Maybe he was supporting the work," Daniel said. But even as he spoke, he knew that didn't make sense. "Or he was documenting it," Fiona said. "Gathering evidence, building a case to shut them down." Daniel thought about Annalise's letter. She hadn't written about a supporter. She'd written about an enemy. "We need to know more about him," Daniel said. "About what he believed, what he was doing in the late 30s. Fiona pulled up her research files. Jacob Brenner was a founding member of the America First Committee in this region. He gave speeches, wrote editorials, argued that America should close its borders. She pulled up a scanned newspaper article from 1938. Listen to this. Mr. Brenner stated that certain racial groups were unsuited to American values and that admitting them would dilute the national character. Daniel felt sick. Benedict and Annalise had been sheltering the very people Brenner wanted to keep out. "Do we know when this photo was taken?" Fiona asked. Daniel checked the metadata Judith had sent. August 1938, 2 months before Annalise died. They looked at each other. Brenner had been documenting the refuge work, and then, 2 months later, Annalise was dead. "We need to find out if there are other photos," Daniel said. "If Brenner was watching them, there might be more documentation." "Those would be private family papers," Fiona said. Not something they'd share voluntarily. No, but maybe there are other ways. Fiona's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then her expression changed. "Dad, we got another response. This one's different." She showed him the message. It was from someone named Alan Keller, responding to a query about Annalise. Asterisk. My great-aunt was Annalise Keller. My family doesn't talk about her, but my grandmother left me some of her things before she died. Letters, a diary. I think you should see them. Can we meet? Asterisk. Daniel's hands were shaking as he typed a response. This was it, direct access to Annalise's own words, her own story. They arranged to meet Alan Keller the next day, at his home 3 hours away. It would mean another long drive, but neither of them hesitated. Alan Keller lived in a restored farmhouse outside of Lancaster, surrounded by fields. He met them at the door, a man in his late 50s, with wire-rimmed glasses and the cautious manner of someone who'd learned to be careful with family secrets. "Come in," he said, leading them through a house that smelled of old wood and coffee. "I wasn't sure I should respond to your message. My family has always been very private about Annalise." "Why?" Fiona asked as they settled into his living room. "Because her death was a scandal. At least, that's what my grandmother said. The official story was that she'd become involved with inappropriate people, that she'd strayed from her social obligations. When she died, the family wanted to move past it quickly." "But your grandmother knew," Daniel said. "She was Annalise's younger sister. She was only 16 when Annalise died, but she remembered everything. And she never believed the accidental drowning story." Alan went to a bookshelf and pulled down a wooden box, worn smooth with age. "Before grandmother died, she gave me this. Said someone should know the truth about Annalise." He opened the box carefully. Inside were letters, photographs, and a small leather-bound journal. "This is Annalise's diary," Alan said, handling it with reverence. "She kept it from 1937 until just before she died. Grandmother found it hidden in Annalise's room after the funeral. She kept it secret for 60 years. Daniel reached for it with trembling hands. Fiona moved closer, and together they opened to the first page. Asterisk, the 1st of January 1937. "I begin this year knowing I will likely not finish it as the person I am now. The work Benedict and I have undertaken will change us both, or it will destroy us. Either way, there is no turning back." Asterisk, they read in silence, Alan watching them. The diary entries were detailed, passionate, sometimes frightened. Annalise wrote about families arriving in the night, about children who'd seen things no child should see. Asterisk, the 15th of March, 1937. A family from Munich tonight. The father was a lawyer, respected, successful, now worth nothing. Jews are no longer allowed to practice law, to teach, to own businesses. His wife was beaten in the street. Their daughter is 8 years old and has stopped speaking. Benedict finds them a room, gives them warmth and food. The daughter sleeps for 14 hours straight. When she wakes, she asks her mother if this is heaven. Asterisk, Fiona's hand found Daniel's. They kept reading. The entries showed the network's operations contacts in New York and Chicago, safe houses in other states, families being moved from danger to safety. Annalise wrote about the constant fear of discovery. Asterisk, the 3rd of June 1937. My former fiancé came to the house today. He demanded I stop this nonsense, said I. Was embarrassing his family. That my work was unpatriotic and dangerous. I told him, some things are more important than patriotism. He left angry. Asterisk. The diary continued through 1937 and into 1938. The entries became more anxious. Annalise wrote about feeling watched, about strangers asking questions in town. Asterisk, the 10th of February 1938. Jacob Brenner visited Benedict at the mill today, offered to buy his business for twice its value. Benedict refused. I know what this means. Brenner is trying to remove Benedict's financial independence. to force him to stop the refuge work. Asterisk, asterisk, the 22nd of May, 1938. Brenner came to the house today. He walked through, looking at everything, asked pointed questions about the guests Benedict entertains. I told him we help families in need, that Christian charity demands no less. He laughed, said charity was admirable, but harboring illegal immigrants was criminal. Asterisk, Daniel looked up at Alan. Did she know he was documenting everything? Keep reading. Asterisk, August 30, 1938. I saw him today, taking photographs. Brenner stood across the road with a camera, making no attempt to hide. He wants us to know we're being watched. He wants us to be afraid. Benedict says we should stop for a while. But there are 3 families here now, and 2 more arriving next week. Where would they go if we closed our doors? Asterisk. The handwriting grew shakier in the September entries. Annalise wrote about nightmares, about feeling trapped. Asterisk. The 24th of September 1938. Benedict begs me to leave, to go somewhere safe. He says Brenner's threats are no longer veiled. But I cannot leave these families, and I cannot let Brenner win. If we stop now, he'll know that threats work. Asterisk. The 2nd of October 1938. Brenner sent me a letter, direct, unmistakable. He writes that my activities are damaging to the community, that I am aiding people who threaten American values. He says if I do not cease immediately, he will take matters into his own hands. Asterisk. The final entries were dated October 1938. The last one was October 14, 3 days before Annalise died. Asterisk. The 14th of October 1938. Brenner demands a meeting. Says he has evidence that could see Benedict arrested. Says if I meet with him privately, he might be persuaded to overlook certain indiscretions. I do not believe him, but I must try. If there is any chance to protect Benedict and the families, I have to take it. We meet tomorrow at Marsh Creek. I have told Perry, the groundskeeper. If something happens, he knows where to look. Asterisk. The diary ended there. The next day, Annalise Keller had drowned in Marsh Creek. The silence in Alan's living room was absolute. Finally, Fiona spoke. She knew. She knew it was a trap and she went anyway. To protect Benedict and the families, Daniel said. His great-grandfather's grief suddenly made sense. He'd let her go to that meeting, knowing the danger. Alan reached into the box again. There's more. Letters between Annalise and Benedict from that last year. The letters were intimate, revealing a relationship that went beyond partnership. Benedict and Annalise had loved each other. They wrote about dreams for after the refuge work ended, about a future together. Asterisk. My dearest Benedict. Asterisk. One letter read, asterisk. When this is over, I want only simple things. A garden, Sunday dinners, the sound of your voice reading evening prayers. We have given so much to this work. Perhaps when it's done, we might give something to ourselves. Asterisk. Daniel's eyes burned. Benedict had lost not just a partner, but the woman he loved. And he'd carried that grief for the rest of his life. There's one more thing, Alan said. He pulled out a small cloth bundle. Grandmother found this with Annalise's things. He unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a child's doll, handmade from scraps of fabric with button eyes and yarn hair. Stitched into the hem of its dress were the words asterisk for Sophie with love, A. K asterisk. Fiona gasped. Sophie Feldman, the girl from Judith Rosenberg's family, Annalise maid. This, Daniel said, holding the doll gently. She gave it to one of the children she was protecting. Mr. Keller, Daniel said, would you allow us to share these? The diary, the letters, this doll. Would you help us tell Annalise's story? Alan was quiet for a long time. My family won't like it. They've spent 87 years pretending Annalise was an embarrassment. This will force them to confront what she really was, a hero who was murdered for doing the right thing. Yes, Fiona said. It will. Good, Alan said firmly. It's time. Grandmother made me promise that if anyone ever came asking the right questions, I should tell them everything. You're asking the right questions. They spent the rest of the afternoon photographing every page of the diary, every letter, documenting everything in the box. Alan told them stories his grandmother had shared about Annalise's kindness, her determination, her refusal to be intimidated. Grandmother said the day Annalise died, the whole town knew something was wrong. But no one spoke up. Brenner was too powerful. When they ruled it an accidental drowning, no one dared contradict them. Except your grandmother, Fiona said. Except grandmother. She told anyone who'd listen that Annalise had been murdered. They called her hysterical, grief-stricken. Eventually, she stopped talking about it publicly, but she never stopped believing it. As the sun began to set, they prepared to leave. Alan walked them to the car, carrying the box. Keep these, he said, handing it to Daniel. Use them. Tell the story right. Annalise deserves that much. On the drive back, neither spoke much. They were processing what they'd learned, the weight of Annalise's sacrifice, the depth of Benedict's loss. Dad, Fiona finally said, we have enough now. The diary, the letters, the testimony from descendants. We can prove what they were doing and why it mattered. We can show that Annalise's death wasn't an accident. We can prove she thought Brenner would kill her, Daniel corrected. We still can't prove he actually did it. The diary is pretty damning evidence. It's evidence of her fear and his threats. But a lawyer would argue it's not proof of murder. Fiona's hands tightened on the steering wheel. You know that's not what happened. I know it. You know it. But we need evidence that will hold up to scrutiny. Something that connects Brenner directly to her death. Where would we even find that? It's been 87 years. Daniel thought about the photograph, about Brenner documenting the refuge work. He kept records. Men like that document everything. If he had photographers taking pictures, if he was building a case, he would have kept those records. The Brenner family archives, Fiona said slowly. Do you think they still exist? Family foundations usually maintain historical records, but we can't exactly ask to see them. Daniel smiled, despite the gravity. No, but maybe we don't. I have to ask. He pulled out his phone and called the Chester County Historical Society. Constance answered on the third ring. Constance, it's Daniel Merrick. Quick question, does the Brenner Family Foundation have archives at the Historical Society? Some, yes. When they renovated their offices 10 years ago, they donated several boxes. Why? Would those records be accessible to researchers? Technically, yes, but... She paused. Daniel, what exactly are you looking for? I'm not entirely sure, but it would be from the late 1932. Correspondence, photographs, business records. Constance was quiet for a moment. The Brenner collection isn't catalogued yet. It's in our storage facility. We've been short-staffed. Could we look at it anyway? Not officially. But if someone were to volunteer to help with cataloguing, they'd have legitimate access, and what they happened to notice while cataloguing would be their own business. Daniel understood. When could we start? Come by. Tomorrow morning. I'll set you up as volunteer archivists. After he hung up, Fiona was grinning. She knows what we're doing. She knows. And she's helping. Why would she risk it? Because some people care more about truth than comfort. They drove the rest of the way in excited silence. Somewhere in the Brenner family papers there might be proof. A letter, a photograph, a record of payment. Back in Daniel's room, they laid out the doll next to the other artifacts. The fireproof box, the ledger, the photographs, Annalise's diary, Benedict's letters. Piece by piece, they were assembling not just a story, but a memorial. Mom would have loved this, Fiona said suddenly. Daniel looked at his daughter, surprised. She always said you had a good heart, that you cared about people even when you didn't show it. She'd be proud of what you're doing. What we're doing. She'd be proud of you, Daniel said. The way you've thrown yourself into this. Your mother always believed in standing up for what's right. They looked at each other across the scattered artifacts of courage and loss. 3 years of silence, bridged by the story of people who'd been brave when being brave was dangerous. "I'm glad I came home," Fiona said. "So am I." That night, Daniel dreamed of the house as it had been, not during his restoration, but during Benedict's time. He walked through rooms full of families, heard children laughing, smelled bread baking. He saw Annalise sitting with a little girl, teaching her to sew. He saw Benedict at the door, welcoming strangers with quiet dignity, and he understood what the house had really been. Not just shelter from the weather, but shelter from a world that had turned cruel. Not just walls and rooms, but hope made tangible. The fire had taken the structure, but the purpose remained. The next morning at the Historical Society's storage facility, Constance met them with keys and a knowing look. "The Brenner collection is in the back corner. 12 boxes. No one's looked at them thoroughly since they were donated." She handed Daniel a clipboard. "Just sign each box out as you go through it. Take all the time you need." The boxes were arranged on metal shelving, labeled with dates. Daniel and Fiona started with the ones marked 1935 to 1940 and carried them to a work table. The first box was mostly business correspondence orders, contracts, payroll records. The second box was more interesting. It contained personal correspondence, including letters with the America First Committee. "Listen to this," Daniel said, reading aloud. "The influx of undesirable elements threatens to dilute American character. We must remain vigilant against those who would open our borders to inferior races." "Keep reading," Fiona said, photographing each page. "We need to establish his ideology." In the third box, Daniel found something that made him pause. It was a folder labeled Surveillance 1938. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, all of the Merrick estate. The photos showed families arriving, sometimes in daylight but more often at night. They showed people entering and leaving the house, children playing in the yard, adults gathered on the porch. Many had notations on the back dates, estimated number of people, observations about their apparent ethnicity. "He was documenting everything," Fiona said, looking through the photos. "Building a case, or building insurance," Daniel suggested. "Proof he could use if he needed to justify what he did." Near the bottom of the folder was a photo that made Daniel's breath catch. It showed Annalise standing on the porch, helping a child down the steps. The child was holding a handmade doll. The photo was dated September 1938. On the back, in Brenner's handwriting, "Subject continues activities despite warnings. More direct action required." "That's a threat," Fiona said. "Written evidence of his intent." "It's ambiguous," Daniel countered. "A lawyer could argue more. Direct action meant legal action, not violence. Keep looking. There has to be more." The fourth box contained financial records, ledgers showing payments made by Brenner Mills. Most were routine, but one ledger had a section marked Special Disbursements. The entries were vague, listing only amounts and dates. Fiona ran her finger down the page. The 15th of October 1938, $500. That's 2 days before Annalise died. Could be anything. Or payment for a job done. Fiona was already photographing the page. $500 was a lot of money in 1938. They continued through the box, finding 2 more unexplained payments in the following weeks, another $500 on October 20, and $1,000 on November 3. "Hush money," Fiona said. "He paid someone to kill her, then paid them to disappear." The fifth box yielded something even more significant. It was a folder labeled Legal Matters Confidential. Inside were documents related to the coroner's inquest, copies of the death certificate, witness statements, the official ruling. But there were also other papers, drafts of the witness statements, crossed out and rewritten, with margin notes in Brenner's handwriting. "Look at this," Daniel said. "This is Perry Sutherland's statement, the groundskeeper, but this is a draft, not the final version." The draft statement was more detailed. It described Annalise leaving the estate around 2 in the afternoon, mentioning that she'd seemed anxious. It noted that she'd told Perry she was meeting someone at Marsh Creek, that she'd been threatened. In the margin, Brenner had written, "Too specific, revised to remove references to meeting or threats." The final version was much shorter. It simply said Perry had seen Annalise walking toward the creek, that she'd seemed in good spirits, that he'd had no concerns. "He edited the witness statements," Fiona said, her voice shaking with anger. "He controlled the narrative. But there was more. At the bottom of the folder was a letter, yellowed with age, written in a shaky hand on cheap paper. Asterisk, "Mr. Brenner, I done what you asked and it's finished. But my conscience troubles me. That woman never hurt nobody. She was just helping people. This ain't right. I'm leaving Chester County. Don't try to find me. And don't never contact me again. What happened at the creek stays between you, me, and God. He'll judge us both." Asterisk. The letter wasn't signed, but it was dated the 19th of October 1938, 2 days after Annalise died. Daniel felt cold all over. This was it, not quite a confession, but close enough. Someone admitting they'd killed Annalise on Brenner's orders, expressing guilt, fleeing. "This is murder," Fiona said. "This is actual provable murder. Why would he keep this?" "Insurance," Daniel said. "If the killer ever tried to blackmail him, Brenner would have proof the man had acted willingly. Mutual destruction." They photographed everything in the folder, then continued through the remaining boxes. They found more surveillance photos, more threatening notations, more evidence of Brenner's obsession. In the final box, they discovered something unexpected, a sealed envelope marked "Not to be opened until 2025. Daniel and Fiona looked at each other. "That's this year," Fiona said. Daniel's hands were shaking as he opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, written in neat, feminine handwriting, dated 1995. Asterisk. "To whoever finds this, my name is Margaret Brenner. I am Jacob Brenner's granddaughter. I am writing this in my 83rd year, knowing I will be dead long before anyone reads it. For most of my life, I believed the family stories about my grandfather, that he was a great man, a patriot, a builder of industry. It wasn't until I was in my 50s that I found evidence to the contrary. In 1968, while cleaning out his effects after his death, I discovered a private journal. In it, he wrote about his activities in the 1,930 seconds, his surveillance of those helping immigrants, and his decision to eliminate a problem at Marsh Creek in October 1938. He wrote about it matter-of-factly, the way one might describe fixing a business problem. He called Annalise Keller an obstacle and said removing her was necessary to preserve American values. He showed no remorse. I was horrified. I confronted my father with what I'd found. He told me the past was dead and buried, that exposing it would only hurt the family. When I threatened to go public, he bought my silence. I am ashamed to say I accepted his terms, a trust fund for my children, security for my old age, in exchange for destroying the journal and never speaking of it. I burned the journal as promised, but I could not burn my conscience. I am leaving this letter with instructions that it be sealed until 2025, 30 years after my death. By then, everyone directly involved will be gone. Jacob Brenner ordered the murder of Annalise Keller. He paid someone to kill her and make it look like an accident. He corrupted witnesses and officials to ensure the crime stayed hidden. I cannot undo his crimes, but I can ensure that someday someone knows the truth. If you are reading this, please make sure her story is told. Margaret Brenner Halstead, the 15th of July, 1995. Asterisk. Daniel and Fiona sat in stunned silence. The confession they'd needed from a family member who'd lived with the truth. She knew, Fiona whispered. She knew for decades and kept quiet, until she couldn't anymore. Daniel said. Guilt is a heavy burden. They photographed the letter carefully, then replaced everything in the boxes. When they returned them to Constance, she took one look at their faces and knew they'd found something significant. "Whatever you discovered," she said quietly, "be careful how you use it." "Not for much longer," Fiona said. Back in the car, they sat without starting the engine, processing what they'd learned. The surveillance photos, the edited witness statements, the confession from the hired killer, Margaret's letter together. They formed an unassailable narrative. Jacob Brenner had murdered Annalise Keller, not directly, but through an agent, which under the law made him just as guilty. And he'd used his power to cover it up, to corrupt the investigation, to ensure no one was ever held accountable. "What do we do now?" Fiona asked. Daniel thought about Benedict, carrying this knowledge for decades, too afraid to speak it. He thought about Annalise, walking to her death, knowing the danger but going anyway. He thought about the families they'd saved. "We tell the story," he said, "all of it. The refuge work, the courage, the murder, the cover-up. We make sure everyone knows. The Brenners will fight us. Let them. We have evidence they can't refute. We have descendants ready to testify. We have Margaret's confession implicating her own grandfather." Fiona smiled, fierce and determined. "When do we go public?" "Soon. But first, we organize everything, create a comprehensive presentation. We make it airtight." They spent the evening organizing. Fiona created a detailed timeline, cross-referencing dates from the ledger with Brenner's surveillance photos and payments. Daniel drafted a narrative that told the complete story from Benedict and Annalise's first efforts in 1931 through her murder in 1938. Around midnight, Fiona looked up from her laptop. "Dad, I've been thinking. We should release this as a series, not all at once. Build public interest. Let each revelation land." "What do you mean?" "First, we release the story of the refuge network, what they did, how many families they helped. Make people care about Benedict and Annalise as heroes. Then, once that's established, we release evidence of Annalise's murder. By then, people will be invested. They'll demand justice." Daniel considered it. "That's smart. Frame the narrative before introducing the crime. It's what I do. Manage stories, control messaging." She smiled slightly. "I just usually do it for software companies, not historical justice." They worked until 3 in the morning, refining their approach, identifying the descendants they'd contact first, planning how to present evidence compellingly. They started with Judith Rosenberg. Within a week, Fiona had connected with 17 families whose ancestors had been sheltered at the Merrick estate. Each had stories, photographs, artifacts. Daniel drafted a comprehensive document titled The Merrick House, A History of Courage and Compassion, 1931 to 1938. 40 pages long, meticulously sourced, telling the complete story. Fiona designed it beautifully, incorporating photographs and first-person accounts. They decided to present it first to the State Historical Society. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday. The executive director, Patricia Langford, had reviewed their preliminary materials and expressed cautious interest. But she'd also warned that accusations against prominent families required extraordinary evidence. "We'll need to be prepared for pushback," Daniel told Fiona the night before. That afternoon, he'd received a phone call from a lawyer representing the Brenner Family Foundation. The conversation had been brief and pointed. "Mr. Merrick, I understand you've been researching historical matters related to the Brenner family. I'm calling to advise you that any public statements containing false or defamatory claims will be met with immediate legal action." "I haven't made any public statements," Daniel had replied, "but you're planning to. We're aware of your recent activities. Consider this a courtesy warning." The threat had been clear, but it had also confirmed something: they were being watched. He didn't tell Fiona about the call. But he made sure to upload copies of all their evidence to multiple cloud services, sent backup files to Lawrence, and gave Alan Keller instructions to keep the original diary somewhere safe. The morning of the presentation, they drove to Harrisburg. The State Historical Society occupied a beautiful building near the Capitol. Patricia Langford met them in the lobby. "Mr. Merrick, Fiona, thank you for coming." She led them to a conference room where 3 other people waited, 2 historians and the Society's legal counsel. "Given the nature of your research, I thought it prudent to have our attorney present." Fiona set up her laptop and projector while Daniel distributed printed copies of their report. Then, taking a breath, he began. He started with Benedict's story, a widower who'd turned grief into purpose, who'd opened his home to families fleeing poverty and persecution. He showed the ledger entries, explained the network's operations. The historians were engaged, taking notes, asking questions. This was the safe part. Then Daniel introduced Annalise Keller. He showed her photograph, read excerpts from her diary, explained her partnership with Benedict. "Opposition? From whom?" one of the historians asked. This was the moment. Daniel pulled up a surveillance photo, Jacob Brenner standing outside the Merrick estate, camera in hand. "From Jacob Brenner," Daniel said. "Industrialist, America First Committee member, and eventual murderer." The room went very still. Daniel continued methodically. He showed the surveillance photos, the threatening notations, the edited witness statements. He read Margaret Brenner's letter aloud. When he finished, no one spoke for a long moment. Finally, Patricia said, "This is explosive material. If true—" "It is true," Fiona interrupted. "We have verified every claim. The evidence is overwhelming. Nevertheless," the legal counsel said carefully, "you're accusing a deceased man whose descendants are prominent citizens. The society must be careful about endorsing such serious allegations." "These aren't allegations," Daniel said. "These are documented facts. Facts that will be contested. The Brenner family won't accept this quietly." "I know," Daniel said. "They've already threatened legal action against me." Patricia looked troubled. "They have? When?" "Yesterday." One of the historians spoke up. "We present it as historical documentation of the refuge network, verified and significant. We include Annalise's murder as part of the narrative, supported by contemporary evidence. We note the suspicious circumstances. We don't explicitly accuse Brenner, we let the evidence speak." "That's cowardice," Fiona said bluntly. "That's prudence," the historian countered. "It's how historical societies handle controversial material." Daniel looked at Fiona. They'd found the truth. They had evidence. But institutions were too cautious. "Fine," he said. "The society can be prudent. But Fiona and I aren't bound by institutional caution. We can say what you won't." Patricia nodded slowly. "If you choose to go public independently, the society won't contradict you. We'll confirm the refuge network's existence, Benedict and Annalise's work. If you want to make additional claims about the circumstances of Annalise's death, that's your choice. And the Brenners will sue us," Fiona said. "Probably," the attorney agreed. "But unlike the society, you don't have institutional assets to protect, and given the evidence you have, I doubt they'd want to go to trial. Too much risk of having all this aired publicly." Daniel understood. Once it was public, litigation would only draw more attention. "So we release it ourselves," he said, "through media, social platforms, directly to the public." They set a date, 2 weeks. 3 months later, Daniel stood on the cleared land where the Merrick estate had stood, watching workers install the memorial marker. Spring had fully arrived. The grass was green, wildflowers dotted the fields, and the air smelled of earth and possibility. Fiona was coordinating with the landscape architect, planning the memorial garden that would surround the marker. They decided on native plants, benches for reflection, a circular path representing the journey of the families who'd passed through here. The insurance settlement had finally come through, along with contributions from the Brenner Foundation and donations from descendants. There was enough money not just for the memorial, but for a small education center, a restored barn that would house exhibits about the refuge network. Daniel had committed fully to the memorial project. Fiona had given notice at her marketing firm and moved back permanently. They were partners now, working together to create something that honored the past while speaking to the present. The story had taken on a life beyond their control. Historians were researching other refuge networks. Descendants were connecting with each other. Educational institutions were developing curricula around the Merrick House story. The Brenner family had changed too. After the story broke, Harrison Brenner had resigned from the foundation board. His sister Carolyn had taken over as president. Under her leadership, the foundation had become genuinely committed to social justice work, funding organizations that helped refugees. She'd told Daniel she saw it as generational repair, trying to balance her grandfather's evil with sustained good. Today was special. The memorial marker was being installed, and descendants were coming to see it. Daniel and Fiona had arranged a small ceremony, just a gathering of people connected by history. Judith Rosenberg arrived first, bringing her adult children and grandchildren. She carried the cloth doll in a protective case. "I want the children to see where their great-great-grandmother found safety," she explained. Other families arrived throughout the morning. Each person carried stories, photographs, artifacts connecting them to this place. Alan Keller came, bringing more of Annalise's letters. Perry Sutherland's grandson attended, representing the groundskeeper who'd preserved Annalise's final letter. At noon, with everyone gathered around the newly installed marker, Daniel spoke briefly. "We're standing on land that witnessed extraordinary courage. For 7 years, this was more than a house, it was hope made tangible. Benedict Merrick and Annalise Keller risked everything to help strangers. That choice cost Annalise her life and broke Benedict's heart. But the lives they saved, those ripple forward through time." He gestured to the descendants. "These people exist because of decisions made 87 years ago by 2 individuals who chose compassion over safety. That's not ancient history, that's a living legacy." Fiona stepped forward, holding the photograph of Benedict and Annalise with the families. "My dad spent 5 years restoring the physical house, but the real restoration happened when we discovered what it represented. A house can burn, but a legacy of courage that's fireproof." They unveiled the marker together. The granite was elegant, the text clear and honest. Several people wiped tears as they read it. Judith approached with her granddaughter, a girl of about 8. She opened the protective case and showed her the doll. "This was made by the woman this memorial honors. She died trying to help people. She was brave and kind, and we remember her." The girl touched the doll gently. "Was she scared?" "Probably," Judith said, "but she helped anyway. That's what makes someone brave. Not that they're never afraid, but that they do the right thing even when they are." The gathering lasted through the afternoon. People shared stories, connected with each other, walked the land. Carolyn Brenner arrived late, having tried to respect the gathering by staying away. But Fiona had invited her. "I don't want to intrude," she said to Daniel. "You're not intruding. This story includes your family too, not just what they did wrong, but what you're choosing to do right." As the sun began to set, people gathered for photographs. Multi-generational families posed by the memorial. The light was golden, making everything look both historical and immediate. Daniel stood with Fiona, watching the scene. His daughter had her camera out, documenting everything. She'd been posting updates throughout the project, building an online community. Thousands were following the memorial's progress. "Mom would have loved this," Fiona said. "She would have," Daniel agreed. "She always believed in standing up for what's right. This would have resonated with her. I miss her. So do I. Every day." They stood in comfortable silence, the first time they'd spoken directly about Catherine's death without pain overwhelming the conversation. The grief was still there, but it had softened. "You know what's strange?" Fiona said. "If the house hadn't burned, we never would have found the fireproof box. We never would have known about Benedict and Annalise. We never would have found our way back to each other." Not strange, purposeful maybe, or just the way life unfolds, loss leading to discovery, endings, creating new beginnings. As darkness fell, people began to leave. They hugged Daniel and Fiona, thanked them, promised to return for the dedication ceremony in the fall. After everyone left, Daniel and Fiona walked the property one more time. The memorial marker glowed softly in the moonlight. The barn restoration was taking shape. The land that had held so much pain and courage was being transformed. "What do you think they'd say?" Fiona asked. "Benedict and Annalise, if they could see all this," Daniel considered. "I think Benedict would be uncomfortable with the attention, but grateful the families are being remembered. And Annalise, I think she'd be satisfied that her death wasn't meaningless, that the story didn't die with her." They reached the spot where the house's front door had been. Daniel could still picture it, the restoration he'd poured 5 years into. All of it gone now, transformed into something he couldn't have imagined. "I thought restoring that house would fix me," he admitted, "that if I could rebuild something broken, I'd somehow rebuild myself. It didn't work that way." "What did work?" "This, finding purpose that wasn't about my grief. Connecting with you again, honoring people who'd been forgotten, building something that looks forward." Fiona slipped her arm through his. "We have so much work to do." "Good. I like having work that matters." The fire had destroyed his house, but revealed his great-grandfather's legacy. In losing everything, he'd found what truly mattered. Some losses were doorways to better things. The house was gone. But the home built from connection and shared mission was stronger than ever. And that was the real legacy worth preserving.